We are live. We are live. We are live. We are live here at World Series News, and thank you everyone for your continued support and, of course, the likes, the shares, the follows, the comments. And there's lots of comments coming through, and I'm really, really pleased that people are starting to really sink their teeth into these detailed reports that Simon's able to provide for us here in Australia on World Series News. And there is a lot more that we need to cover off in today. Just some of the subjects that we'll be covering, of course, with the latest on Pakistan with Imran Khan and the PTI party that's going on there in Pakistan with the arrests, the re-arrests, the bail hearings, etc. We're going to cross to find out the latest from China and the business forums that are going on post the C5 meetings and the G7 to see what actually happens after these deals are all put together. From there, we're going to go back to Australia and talk about the Victorian budget and also comments from ASIO boss Mike Burgess about the security of the voice referendum. We're also going to talk about what's happening in the Arctic Circle, also deals with China there. And then we're going to cross to comments from Simon, from John Mearsheimer, about his perspective on the Ukraine war, so we can all understand what is going on over there. Now, deals have been done in Indonesia with Iran at the same time as the US has done deals in Papua New Guinea. What does it all mean? Well, the one person who's able to explain it better than anyone else appears on World Series News, as he does appear on InfoWars, George Galloway, and even TNT Radio. So who better to get started today than Simon? Let's bring him in now. Simon, welcome back to the show.
Hi there, Jason. It's been a busy couple of days, kind of good days to everyone apart from Imran Khan. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into all the issues that we have going on.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's really important that we get on with the Pakistani news. It's quite confusing. Like you get a story, for example, yesterday in the ABC, Imran Khan has been bailed on all terrorism charges, but you read about it and he's only been bailed for another 10 days or so. So it's not exactly the full report. What is going on with Imran Khan and his party right now, Simon?
So he was only bailed for the literally terrorism charges that were outstanding against him at the ATC, the Anti-Terrorism Court. He had to appear today, this morning, in front of the National Accountability Bureau to assist them with their inquiries relating to the Al Qadir Land Trust and University case. He wasn't arrested, even though he said that he thought there was an 80% chance that he would be. However, several other of his senior party leaders, and you've shown that picture of the 18 of them frequently, were re-arrested as soon as they were released on bail. Literally, they were like arrested as soon as they stepped onto the street. So Mr. Qureshi, who was previously Pakistan's foreign minister, he had been held in detention because he was being required to give a conduct undertaking as part of his bail conditions, his bond conditions. And he didn't want to do that because it basically was going to prevent him from participating in any protests. So he had been having his lawyers argue with the judges as to what exactly the wording should be of his bail conditions. He finally agreed, signed his undertaking, left the court, and was arrested 5 minutes after being freed.
Wow.
So the whole thing about keeping him in prison and signing these conditions was just sheer theatre. And they were going to arrest him whether he agreed to their specific terms or not. Now, in the moments before he was bundled into the police car, some cunning journalist slipped him a question and said, would he be resigning? Because unfortunately, one of the other very senior members, one of the two ladies who I mentioned to you, Shireen Mazari, she's resigned from the PTI after being arrested for the fourth time. Her health just couldn't take it, and she's resigned from politics completely. She's 72. But Qureshi was very determined, and he said no, that he was prepared to go to prison and he wasn't going to quit Imran Khan. Several other leaders have, including one that he'd been friends with for over a decade,
Yeah, this is sad.
who quit all party politics as a bloke. And he said that he would work for the success of the nation in a personal capacity. But what's important is these people, many of whom are businessmen, are having like their factories and warehouses, and in one case, a restaurant, not just fined, not just lawsuits taken against them, but one guy who had a very posh restaurant, the local police turned up with a whole load of construction workers literally riding in the back of some lorries. They all jumped out with sledgehammers and smashed to pieces his restaurant, literally like demoed it. So it didn't just break like the tables and the chairs, like it was the ground floor of the building. It's lucky the entire apartment.
Might have just lost Simon there. No, you're back now.
That's the level of intimidation that these politicians are experiencing, in addition to being arrested and in many cases being tortured. So it really, really is very full on. They've announced the creation of 5 new courts, supposedly to do with customs and smuggling. But it's going to be interesting to see if those are used to process some of the 10,000 party members who have also been arrested. President Alvi had a group of senior army officers who had just graduated from like their war college course. It was called the Senior Leaders Course. And they went in plain clothes. He took a photo with them and then he gave a short speech. And he said that the country really had to re-examine its priorities. But he was very cryptic. He didn't directly call for elections or anything like that. The currency now in the open market, because it's kind of like government regulated where the currency officially trades, much like Argentina. It's kind of officially trading at about 290 rupees to the dollar. You may recall it went as high as 299 when Imran was first arrested 2 weeks ago. Went back down to like 280. Now in the open market, supposedly it's trading at 306. So that's quite shocking that it's broken the kind of psychological 300 barrier. And they, in an impasse, getting the next tranche of money that's part of the $6.5 billion current bailout from the IMF. That's why they're really, really desperate for both the Chinese to roll over a couple of $1 billion deposit and also the Saudis. And then, of course, have all this CPEC money come in. I mean, that's literally going to keep the whole country afloat.
Now, Simon, if you are resorting to torturing your political opponents, do you hold the moral high ground at this stage, or will this be seen through and the Imran Khan and his PTI party at long last be given some grace in all of this?
Well, one, it assumes that Imran Khan stays alive. 2, it assumes that he remains in the country. 3, it assumes that the elections even take place in October, because if they have the support of the military, they can easily declare, even without martial law, they can declare a nationwide state of emergency and then just delay the elections. So they have a lot of cards to play, and the only one Imran Khan's got is elections, because no matter how much you might appeal to overseas governments, they're all terrified about the country falling into civil war. And ironically, unlike Saddam and Gaddafi and Assad, in this case, they would very much prefer to see a military dictatorship rather than a civil war in Pakistan. And everyone feels that way. Like the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, like nobody wants a total meltdown in Pakistan.
Okay. So we watch with bated breath that the Pakistanis, the PTI party, Imran Khan, will be saved, protected, and not taken out in this great big war. But the machinations of all power
Yeah, because you see, he's
is
got
being
so
played
many
out.
criminal charges against him. And because the Electoral Commission of Pakistan said that he basically was disbarred from office for a period of time, that he may end up like Nawaz Sharif, the current Prime Minister's brother, who's in exile in London. And he may just not have any official position and maybe running the party from the background. But that's why having the really important people like Shireen Mazari were incredibly important for them to be the public face of the party leadership in positions of authority officially, potentially as soon as November. And, if they're being forced to quit one after the other, and he can't, say, for example, be Prime Minister, who's going to be left to be the Prime Minister? It's a very effective strategy that the PDM are working on. Now, it's completely underhand and crooked, but it seems to be working.
Yeah, indeed. All right, let's move to Australia now. And we've noticed that, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. It's the Victorian budget, and an interesting headline that appeared in the Australian Financial Review. Albanese Wong refused to commit to human rights discussions with India. At the same time, the headline reads, the Prime Minister bats away a possible Victorian bailout. Victorian businesses and property investors slam with $8.6 billion budget levy, which are these so-called temporary levies, Simon, whereby for 10 years, the Andrews government is going to have a COVID levy to bail themselves out using taxpayer money, because Andrews apparently did everything right and it's up to the public to bail him out. This is just ferocious in a time where landlords are going to be punished when you've already got a massive rental property shortfall. It just seems like the Andrews government is economically inept.
Yeah, but it's not really a bailout, because if you look at the budget forecasts, even with that 8.7 billion, the deficit is still forecast to go up to 174 billion over the next few years. So, it's too little, too late, having overspent, and it's a problem because obviously they're talking about the RBA putting up interest rates at least another 2 or 3 times. You're going to have interest rates at like 5%. So the servicing costs on all this debt are going higher and higher and higher as well. Yeah. And so, they're in a real fix.
Yeah, they certainly are. And interest rates retail in Australia are already around about the 6 to 6.5% for the average home loan. So interest rates will be going into the 7%, it seems, to combat inflation from a retail perspective, which is almost as high as it was before the GFC. It's just truly astonishing that they just use this almost like a pendulum swinging from one end to the other. The old days of 17% interest rates no longer apply, obviously, when the price of property has gone from $80,000 to a mean of almost $1 million for a home now in a capital city. Now, I just want to change tack just a little bit and bring up this picture. This is Mike Burgess. He is the ASIO intelligence chief, and he's had a couple of interesting things to say lately. He has confirmed that his organisation is on the lookout to security threats and foreign interference ahead of the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum. Mr. Burgess said an assessment had been recently conducted by ASIO on the possible threat to the referendum ahead of it being held in October and December. We're not seeing indications of people planning a terrorist attack as part of that, but that's something that we constantly look at, noting that terrorism threat level is still probable, he told Senate estimates. Mr. Burgess said there was not currently intelligence that any nation state was planning to interfere in the referendum, but ASIO was keeping an eye on that risk. Of course, we always keep an open mind to that, and we're on the lookout, he said. Mr. Burgess said there was potential for the debate ahead of the referendum to result in spontaneous violence. Unfortunately, we do expect people, as they express their views and exchange their views online, that might inflame some people. There might be some protest and counter-protest, and some of that might result in spontaneous violence. Now, this is the same man, Simon, that was asked by Senator Alex Antic whether or not he knew of any ASIO-implanted journalists into the Australian media, and his response was, "If I knew, I couldn't tell you anyway." Antic took that as a yes, and he took it as a no comment. Interesting that this is where we're going now, that the media is totally in control of all censorship. And this is where we're coming from here. This is just a complete nonsense that we'd be looking at some form of terrorist attack on Australia because of an internal constitutional referendum on rights. It makes no sense to me, but this is kind of the manipulation that we hear from our authorities, our defence chief, our intelligence chief of all people.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunately widespread, because even in America, this past weekend, we had the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, put out like a 1-minute trailer advert about disinformation that wasn't even talking about medical disinformation or food disinformation. It was like, everyone was like, what the hell does that have to do with the Food and Drug Administration? Like if they were talking about people saying, oh, you know, like take 10 grams of this medicine and you were supposed to take half a gram, then clearly that would be like life-threatening. They weren't talking about any kind of examples like that. So that was very dystopian. Then the Health and Human Services put out a similar message. And then we had this really bizarre photo of the head of the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. This woman called Jen Clark from CISA. She was meeting with her French counterpart, and she had this like bright red silk blouse on under a red jacket that looked like she'd grabbed the red jacket from one of her size 2 colleagues, and it was like 2 sizes too small for her. And one of the sleeves was like down to her fingertips. The other one was pulled right up her forearm. And then she had some kind of weird tattoos on her forearm, one of which looked like a lion's head. And her nail varnish was psychedelic green. If you got it on the screen for you right now. If you can zoom in on her left hand, where the sleeve is rolled up.
Can't get the zoom on that now, but you can probably see.
Well, maybe people can just see that her thumb there is a bright psychedelic green, like you'd have on a construction worker's high-vis jacket. So you're meeting the French head of cybersecurity, and you've got your nails varnished psychedelic green. Your jacket's too small, and one sleeve's down and one's up. It's just a shambles. It's like really bizarre. She seems to run 3 Twitter accounts. She's got like one for a dog, one for herself, one for her agency. Uses them interchangeably. And these were the people, don't forget, who were going to oversee the Misinformation and Disinformation Board, along with the Department of Homeland Security.
Indeed, so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty scary, these people. By the way, talking about that, the woman who was previously the head of that, Nina Jankovic, the one they called Mary Poppins, because she liked to put out TikTok videos of herself singing very loudly with incredibly heavy applications of super bright lipstick. She's now suing various media organizations, including, I think, Fox News, because she claims that when she lost her job, because she was an absolute psycho and there hadn't been any Senate oversight of her appointment, that she was clearly not suited for, that she not only lost her job, but she was then made to feel unsafe. But in the meantime, she set up her own disinformation platform and is back to advising the government, albeit in a private capacity rather than as a paid federal employee. And talking of lawsuits, you may not have noticed, this just came out a few hours ago, that they've announced the date of the fraud trial against Trump for supposedly hiding the source of the money that was used to pay the ex-porn star that he allegedly slept with, right? And that's going to start on the 24th of March next year. So that's halfway in the primary season.
Yes.
and that's a criminal trial, so he has to appear. So if they can drag that out for like 2 or 3 weeks, he's literally not going to be able to be on the campaign trail because he's going to have to be in the courthouse for the entire time.
Yeah.
So how much of that is a Pakistan-style lawfare, right?
Yeah, this is what
The,
we call
the
lawfare,
judge could
right?
easily have said, we're going to expedite it and we're going to start like in September. So it was done before the primaries start. Could easily have done that. Scheduling it for like, 10 months out is ridiculous. Okay. Or he could have said, right, we'll wait and see if he gets elected and then we'll do it in 2025.
Yep.
And he didn't do either. He literally gave like the Solomon's choice of cutting the baby in the half.
No, well said. Now, look, Simon.
Was that Solomon or was it King David? King David, I think it was, right? Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I just want to go also now to the Chinese business forums, and what I want to do is just explain to the viewers that may or may not have seen the previous shows, but many people obviously have. And thank you for liking, following, sharing, and commenting. And I'll post some of the comments up from today's show in a moment as we're going along. But the C5 was a massive deal because it introduced the 5 stand countries of Central Asia into a deal where they agreed to meet China on a number of different platforms, almost like it was going to be like an annexing of these 5 countries to create the greatest landmass between Russia and China. But the business doesn't stop. What's happening now with the upcoming Chinese Business Forum?
Right. So yesterday and tomorrow, we have the Russia-China Business Forum in China, and the Russian Prime Minister, who I think you've got a pic of there, he is already there. He arrived last night when they had their kind of like welcoming banquet, and he made a very interesting comment, and this, I'll explain the comment first and I'll put the context on. So he said that he was mainly there to ensure the technical cooperation required to further the deals that his boss and President Xi had signed in Moscow in March. That was the huge meeting in March 2021-22. Okay. And so that's true. President Xi had requested that this gentleman be sent as soon as possible, since he's the head technocrat.
Might just have lost you there again, Simon. Just was standing by to just get you back there. Here you are. I can hear you in the background. Gotcha.
Okay. So Xi wanted to make sure that all the bureaucrats were pulling on the ropes at the same time in the same direction. So Putin immediately sent like a technical delegation to get on with the real nitty-gritty of the works and meet up with the Chinese counterparts. And then here we are, exactly 2 months on, and now the Prime Minister's there. Now, in that kind of off-the-cuff remark, he said mainly, and I'm going to stick my neck out here and make a forecast, because I've been having quite a run of luck with those, that what he was implying there was there's going to be another big announcement, because what we've got coming up relatively soon this year is the 10th anniversary Belt and Road Initiative Forum that is held every 2 years. This year it's going to be in China. 2021 didn't happen because of COVID. 2019, Putin was the guest of honor and gave the keynote speech. Now, even though it's going to be in China, they've already announced in the last 24 hours that Putin will be attending, and he will be the guest of honor.
Wow.
So I've got a very strong feeling that what this guy is doing is he's not only pushing ahead with the deals that were done in March, but that 5 or 10 or 20%, whatever, of his time, other than the main part, is agreeing the announcements that Putin will make when he attends that next big event, which
Right.
is very symbolic because it's the 10th anniversary event.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you've got to remember, as we discussed a few days ago, that the Chinese media, whilst they wouldn't break the embargo on the details for the Xi'an summit declaration, they did say that this is only the first major event of the year.
Yes.
So there's a very strong indication that that 10th anniversary summit, which in itself is cause for celebration, is going to be huge. It's going to be really, really big. And this is at the same time as the South Africans, who are obviously going to be running the BRICS summit, which is in August. They've now announced to the press that they're receiving BRICS Plus applications from other countries at the rate of 1 a week. When they last gave an update, they said that there were 13 other countries who had applied to join BRICS. That number, as of yesterday, is now 30 countries.
Wow.
30 who have asked to join BRICS. Now, bear in mind that what the main discussion point for BRICS Plus is going to be not necessarily announcing the implementation, but announcing the concept of a trade currency to replace the US dollar. So if that goes from 5 countries, the current BRICS, right?
Yes.
To 35 countries dumping the dollar, that's huge, right?
It's huge. Of course. And we already know, Simon, that the 5 countries that represent BRICS already represents 42% of the world's population. So you add another 30 countries on top and you are well over 50% of the world's population. And also when you compare landmass and GDP, the BRICS nations completely saturate the US dollar at this point. It's like the US dollar is a shadow of its former self.
Yeah. So we can see that there are still, it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to see some very big accounts occurring now. Are we going to go now to Papua New Guinea, or are we going to Indonesia? Where are we going?
I wanted to talk about the North Sea route.
Yeah, sure. So one of the important things that was in the 14 master agreements that Xi and Putin signed on like the 21st of March, I think it was agreement number 8 out of the 14, was on the expansion of the Northern Sea Route. It's the NSR. Okay. And that is literally to go from China essentially all the way to Norway, but going through the Arctic Circle. Now, that route until recently has only been navigable about 4 months a year. And ironically, I've been arguing this point with several maritime experts, like guys that I really expect and respect. And they've been saying, no, this is rubbish and you don't know what you're talking about. And I've been like banging on, retweeting this like every week. And finally, they're kind of like going, actually, Simon, it looks like you may well have been right. And just today, we've had a huge article in the Sputnik online. And not only are they talking about the Russians thinking that that could become fully navigable year-round because of the ice melting, 12 months a year. They've announced that they're speeding up the building of their huge Arctic-class nuclear-powered icebreakers. And they're also calling for more investment, which is basically going to be the Saudis, the Indians, and the Chinese, so that all along that route that you can see from Norway to the Bering Strait, they've got 14 ports Now, those have basically mainly been military locations, and a lot of them dated from the Soviet era, and they were in very poor repair. So they've been doing emergency repairs on all of those. But the guy who's in charge of them, which interestingly enough, I believe is Rosatom, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's Rosatom, the company that build the Russian nuclear power plants and have about 30 projects all over the world. Basically, because it's huge construction, they've put the company who does huge construction in charge of revitalizing all those ports. But he doesn't have enough money. So he's already got a big investment from the Chinese. Now he's asking the Saudis and the Indians. And the Indians have already indicated that they're willing to throw money in addition to the port by Vladivostok, right?
Yes, yes.
Which is right on the Chinese-Russian border. Very close, funnily enough, to that tiny bit where they join with North Korea, where Russia joins with North Korea across that river. And they have already, to a large extent, remilitarized that area. And to put this number in context, right? So Russia-China trade next financial year, so 23 going into 24, they're hoping, and it looks like it will be because last year was 190 billion, but total bilateral trade will be essentially by land, right? $200 billion. Okay, that's the gas pipelines and the railways and the roads and all that kind of stuff, and a little bit of shipping of gas as well, and also Arctic oil as well. And the plan for that trade route by 2035 is for it to have, and paying transit fees, $2 trillion. So
wow.
10 times the current Russia-China trade on that route. And because of the ice and where the ports are and where all the navigation signals are and where all the air sea rescue is and all that kind of stuff, what they're trying, and also because of some offshore islands that extend the national waters way beyond 12 miles from the mainland in a few cases. They're talking about all of the ships, no matter what flag, what nationality the ship officially is, whether it's Nigeria or Bermuda or Panama or Marshall Islands, right? That they will have to sail without a doubt in Russia's exclusive economic zone, but in most instances actually within the Russian 12 nautical mile territorial waters, which means that they're completely under the control of the Russian Coast Guard, they're completely under the control of the Russian Navy, and they're going to have to pay transit fees. So it's potentially an astronomical money spinner for them. Now, interestingly enough, a few shows ago, we mentioned how Murkowski had said that the American military really, really needed to get its act together and increase its presence both in Alaska and also in the northern Canadian Arctic zone, bearing in mind that that's a fellow NATO member and they have joint stations up there, facing towards the North Pole. Now, this is where we get to this movie, what was it, the 1982 miniseries with David Soul, the World War III, which I think people will be able to find on YouTube for free. It's 40 years old, and it's actually a very, very good movie. It's a mini-series, but you can watch it all together as a movie. Now, that contemplates Russian paratroopers invading Alaska to blow up the American pumping stations for Alaskan oil, and why is that occurring? Do you remember the beginning of the opening plot of the movie?
No.
Okay, it's because the Americans have a economic blockade for wheat on Russia. And is there an economic blockade now?
Of course.
Yes, there is. Okay, so we're
Wow.
back to exactly that same scenario. Okay, America's just about to increase its oil developments with that huge Willowbrook site right on the north coast of Alaska that would be extremely susceptible to an intervention not only of missiles but of paratroopers flying directly over the North Pole. Now, the end of that, and I'm sorry to be a spoiler, I'll try not to give it all away, is all based upon the concept of what is called great power trust. So in international relations, you have this whole theory of great power activities, for want of another word. You know, there's kind of great power conflict, great power competition, but they differentiate between the superpowers and regular countries.
Yep.
Okay. So this then takes us to the issue of trust.
Yes.
Now, Professor John Mearsheimer from Chicago, he gave a talk last night in Washington, D.C., and it was extremely interesting. And I must admit, I missed the first couple of minutes, but I'm not even sure they started on time. I didn't really seem to have missed anything in particular. And he has been right for decades on the era of pushing NATO further and further eastwards towards the borders of Russia. He's been warning and warning and warning on that, in particular saying that it was like a calamity when NATO announced their open door policy and invited Georgia and Ukraine to join in 2008. Okay?
Yep.
Now, so he gave this talk, and there was two main components. Okay.
Go on.
Right, three. Okay, so the first one was what he called the threat matrix, with essentially looking at whether or not this conflict was existential for America, NATO, Russia, or China. And there's all these kind of things like, if NATO's defeated, will it cause NATO or the European Union to break up? Okay. Yep. Then it's like, if Russia's defeated, before they finally lose, will they go nuclear? And he's like, absolutely for certain, they'll definitely go nuclear.
Wow.
Then the issue is whether or not whoever wins is the role model for a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Okay, so you've got, that was like his threat matrix. Okay. He then went into his four concepts, and in case I don't remember all these, I hope you've got them written down. One of which was trust.
Yes.
Now, he said that these were the four issues that had to be overcome in order for there to be a meaningful and implementable peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And there we have the issue of trust, just like the World War III movie that I won't spoil so people can watch it, right? And I do recommend that. It's even though it's 40 years old, the parallels now are extremely relevant. Like,
yes, of
really,
course.
really relevant. Okay. Plus, it's entertaining, so I definitely recommend that. Now, in the Ukraine context, his point is that you've had Stoltenberg, Hollande, and Merkel, and people within Ukraine, like Poroshenko, all admit that the Minsk II agreement was a fraud, that they never had any intention of abiding by it, and that it was just to enable the Americans to build up, arm, and train the Ukrainian armed forces. So his point was, if you've got everyone who you signed the agreement with only 8 years ago going, ha ha, we tricked you, like something from The Simpsons, right? Why the hell would you sign an agreement with those people again? It doesn't make any sense.
Of course.
Right? Now, the other issue he had was about territory. And he's like, the Russians, even if they would conceivably give up 4 of the oblasts which are like their version of like the Australian or American states, right? The oblasts. So Donbass is 2 oblasts, and then you've got the other 2, Kherson, the one of Kherson and the one with Zaporizhia, plus Crimea. Okay, so his view is they will never ever give up Crimea. Crimea was only given to Ukraine, like when was it? Like in the 50s by Khrushchev, who was himself Ukrainian whilst he was drunk, right?
Yep.
But even then, with the Russians still retaining control of Sevastopol, okay? And that's what the Americans really wanted. The Americans wanted to basically turn Crimea into a huge American naval base, just like Qatar or Bahrain. Okay, so in there they dominate the Persian Gulf. They wanted to dominate the Black Sea and be able to prevent the Russian Navy from even coming out of the Sea of Azov. Okay, so that's what all that situation has been about. So that's territory. Then you had ultra-nationalism. So obviously you've got like the Ukrainian Nazis, and you've got all their worshippers like Stefan Bandera and all the Nazi symbolism, and the UAP, going back to the 40s, Second World War, and the Civil War afterwards. So it's that you've obviously got huge cultural issues to overcome there. So that was 3 issues. On your list, what was the 4th one?
So we had ultranationalism, trust, neutrality.
Yeah, neutrality. That's right. Just remember neutrality. So he said the problem there is that still in Vilnius in July at the new NATO annual conference, they're like some of the crazy Baltic states and Poland are like pushing to like jam Ukraine in, even though there's a hot war going on, right? And that's clearly not going to occur because there's no way that all the other countries will sign off on that because it has to be unanimous, right? And Turkey flat out won't agree to that, assuming that Turkey's even still in NATO in July. And so Putin wants the remainder of Ukraine to be neutral, whereas the Americans and most of NATO want Ukraine to be not only in the EU, but also in NATO. Okay, so those are the 4 sticking blocks. Now, I think there's 2 issues that he overlooked there. One, that though I generally agree with him and he's brilliant, right? So I'm not downplaying his analysis in any regard, but I think there's 2 extra things that maybe he just didn't add in for time. But those 2 things are what you and I have discussed. One is religion and the role of the Russian Orthodox Church. Okay.
Yes.
And the other one is culture. Now, he mentioned areas where people predominantly spoke Russian or not. But what we've had Putin and the Russian Patriarch and Lavrov and Sharapova and God knows how many other people, Medvedev and Patrushev and all these other folks, right? is when they give big policy speeches, they always mention culture. And they even go so far as to mention LGBTQ, whatever, and transgenderism and the protection of children from such policies, for want of another word. And they've really put it in terms of good and evil to a large extent. I think many people in the Middle East also agree with. And what has been discussed in particular with regards to Assad and the Bahrainis and the UAE. You remember when he went on visits to them, they very much talked about maintaining Arabic culture, right? So the Russians, if you look at their national security doctrine that was published earlier this year, like in March, just before the meet with Z, they were talking about maintaining Russian culture. And that was the thing that was mentioned 3 times, which was more than any other thing. So I think that if they're putting emphasis on that and they're mentioning that more than anything else, that you definitely have to include that in your calculations. Because obviously one of the first things that Zelensky did when he got elected, bearing in mind that he was like a comedian and media personality, was he marched at the head of Ukraine's first gay pride parade.
Yes.
Now, whatever your views on the right or wrongs of those two kind of like lifestyles, there's clearly a massive cultural gap between Russia, which has now outright banned the promotion of any kind of sexuality in all grades of their schools, from 4 all the way through to 18, right? Yep. And they regard transgenderism as an absolute abhorrence, right? And so you then got Zelensky like parading around. I'm not talking about the images of him in drag or something which appear to have been photoshopped. I'm just saying that, like Albanese, he marched in the gay pride parade in Kiev, just like Albanese did this year in Sydney, in King's Cross or wherever it was held. Okay, so those were kind of like 2 aspects that I think he erred in overlooking. The other interesting thing was when it went to Q&A, he was asked, and this is what I would clarify as his kind of like 3rd main concept. So you had the risk parameters, you had the 4 impediments to a peace deal, and then the next thing was where did he see it going next? And he was absolutely convinced that the Russians want Odessa to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea, and they want to take Kharkiv and Sumy, and then they want to take another couple of cities on the Dnieper as well. And so he said basically they want to take 8 oblasts plus Crimea, as opposed to 4 oblasts that they currently control, that they don't control all of Donetsk. Okay, so he said that if they can progress all the way to the river, because that is like a really major river, that would give them then a very defendable boundary, albeit that it's quite a long boundary. It would be very hard for the Ukrainians to mount an amphibious crossing without taking like massive casualties. But he doesn't think that they want to take Kharkiv, and he doesn't think they want to take any of the remainder of Western Ukraine. 1, because there are religious differences, 2, because they're slightly ethnically different, and 3, because those people really generally speak Ukrainian as opposed to Russian. And so he has this concept that if they were to take all of Ukraine, that the central and western part would be, quote, like swallowing a porcupine, and that you'd have this constant Polish and Slovak and Romanian supported resistance movement that would be much like the civil war that existed from like 1946 all the way through until 1952 in Ukraine, that many people kind of forget about, but that was a huge civil war. And when that ended, like hundreds of thousands of people were either dead or in Soviet prison camps. And Khrushchev released about 100,000 of them. And that was really resented because the military had spent years fighting these guys, and then he just let them all go. And a lot of those people were involved with the Nazis in World War II, and a lot of them are now part of the diaspora of the Ukrainians in Australia and in Canada. Okay, so that is something that people really don't want to relive. Now, the other thing that he was asked, and I'm going through this in detail because I think it's very, very important. Though there is a kisser at the end,
okay,
as there often is, like the Chinese documents. It's always the last paragraph that's like the FU, that's the really offensive bit.
And I'm going to show you one on Albanese and Modi's deal in just a moment. We're going to go back to some Australian news, but keep going, Simon.
Yeah, sure. So he was obviously asked, how did he see this going? And in addition to them taking the 8 plus Crimea, he thought that it would potentially go on for years and years and years, and that it would finally end up being a what they call a frozen conflict. So examples of frozen conflicts are Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Abkhazia. So these are all places where they had wars and separatist movements and stuff like that in the 1990s. They were never fully resolved, and basically like a Cold War has existed, like the DMZ in Korea between the north and the south on the what is it, the 38th parallel or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
There. So that was where he saw things ending up, and he said that wasn't necessary, even though it would be very expensive for Europe because they'd be constantly bleeding money into it. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing for NATO cohesion because they would have a 1984 George Orwell type endless war in the East. So that kind of suits in terms of there being like a perpetual enemy. Now, the kisser to it was some bright chap stood up at the Q&A session at the end and said, you're not often in Washington, D.C. without revealing any state secrets. Can you tell us whether or not you've been summoned to any government ministries or agencies in order to share your advice with them, right? Now, you have to remember that Mearsheimer, he went to West Point. Okay? He was quite distinguished. He left the military relatively early and went into academia, but has been one of America's greatest international relations theorists for at least the last 30 years.
Yes.
Okay? So he said, like, young man, I am now 75 years old. He says, I have been doing this for almost 50 years as a professor of academic and international relations, and I have never once been asked for my advice by any American government agency.
There you go.
And it was like, wow, wow. You've got like one of the top people in the world, all right? He's been proven right on item after item, particularly on Ukraine, and nobody has reached out to him and said, Can you come into this think tank? Can you come into the CIA? Can you come into the National Security Council for half a day and just share your opinion with us? Let alone heading some kind of like, policy review team on behalf of the State Department or something. This was absolutely staggering. And as well as being sad, is highly indicative as to why we're in the situation that we are. And people will see to my Twitter feed, and I've been asked by a few people, why are you retweeting this stuff that people can understand may be contrary to my expressed opinion, but that isn't particularly important in the circles of power, right? But what I've been trying to do with you and with my Twitter audience and with all the other millions of people who are getting a flavor of my logic on these other shows I'm involved with is the problem that we've got is this universal neocon mindset in all of the other agencies of government and associated think tanks. So we've got the Hudson Institute, we've got the Hoover Institute, we've got the Atlantic Council, we've got the CFR, we've got the Trilateral Commission, all of these organizations, many of which I know your listeners are probably highly suspicious of. They're putting out policy papers and strategy reviews literally monthly, in most cases, saying, don't be scared about the Russians threatening nuclear war, which they did again today in relation to the F-16s, right? Medvedev specifically said that's another step towards full-out nuclear war, okay? And yet you've got all these other people saying, they're bluffing, they'll never push the button. Go, go, go. You can send in American special forces. You can send in American pilots. You can put American ships in the Black Sea and they'll never nuke you. Don't worry, right? And I'm like, are you freaking crazy? But the problem is you've got this groupthink that everyone is saying the same thing, and you will not get promoted in the State Department or in the National Security Council or the Pentagon, or get a senior fellowship at the Institute for the Study of War or the Hoover Institute or the Hudson Institute or the CFR if you say anything that can even be interpreted as being neutral, let alone anti-Ukrainian.
Yes.
You're like cut off. Your academic career and career in government is like instantly ruined. And because we've got this groupthink, which exists to a large extent in American and British and European politics now, there's very few people like Professor Mearsheimer who are warning and warning and warning. Scott Ritter is one of them. There's another academic in Canada, first name Ivan Kachowski, I think his surname is. He's excellent on this. But, they're just being completely ignored. And so there's no real discussion about how did we get into this mess and how do we get out of it? And, the only way short of nuclear war at this point is going to simply be a completely humiliating withdrawal like occurred with Afghanistan. Now, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years, right? We spent over $1 trillion there. We're clearly on a current path to spending $1 trillion in Ukraine, right? If this ends up being a hot war for, say, another year, though there's a lot of indications now that Zelensky's been told that he's only got until the end of the year, right? For him personally, because he's now talking about if the support dries up, then he actually said yesterday that if the European support, actually meant the Western support, dried up for him, that he would go to the highest bidder and leave the country. Now, a lot of people were ready to see him go, and certainly the military circles of NATO were very in favor of the chief of staff of the Ukrainian armed forces, Zaluzny, and were quite willing to see Zelensky leave, go and live in Panama or Italy or wherever he chooses to spend his ill-gotten gains. You know, he's going to have he's going to walk off as a billionaire, right? And so they were like, okay, well, we've got this guy who will like instantly replace him, and there won't be any risk of a mutiny in the army. But now it turns out that there was a missile strike on the bunker where this guy was operating. Many generals were killed, and he was critically wounded, and that he's undergone 5 spinal operations, and they reckon that he'll never walk again. So he's out in terms of becoming the next either president or military dictator of Ukraine. So now they've got this problem of like, oh damn, we've kind of like fierced Zelensky up of giving him until the end of the year. We have this guy in reserve. The reserve guy, you know, our number one substitute, is gone, and now they'll be scurrying around like Victoria Nuland was in 2014 during the Maidan revolution coup, you know, picking the cabinet of the new Ukrainian government, just like she did 9 years ago. So, you know, that's the state of play that we're at. If people want to watch that video, Ray McGovern on Twitter, just Ray MC Govern, hopefully will post it. But I checked repeatedly today because I actually wanted to watch it a second time. It was so good. And because I had to register and watch it on Zoom yesterday.
Sure.
Which I watched straight after the Kennedy interview. Now,
yes.
I know we're kind of like at the end of our time. I'm not going to break that down, but he, like us, was scheduled to give a 1-hour interview with Dr. Drew and Dr. Kelly, okay, on the Dr. Drew show. So people can find it if they go to Dr. DR and then Drew, DREW, on Twitter.
I'll try and find that while we're going, just to give people
I think it's also the same on YouTube as well. So it started 10 minutes late, but they ran over for 10 minutes. So it is indeed 60 minutes. Now, obviously, I would generally encourage people to watch the whole thing. But to be honest, if people don't have an additional hour on top of what they've just spent with us, right, then I would say in the interview, jump forward 30 minutes, because the first 30 minutes is basically medical stuff and vax type stuff, okay?
That you're probably already aware of,
And then watch minute 30 to minute 50, you know, the last 5 minutes are like a wrap up, right? So watch minute 30 to minute 55.
Okay.
Because he talks about how he would deal with breaking up a lot of agencies, including like the FBI and the CIA. Doesn't really talk very much about foreign policy because he's with 2 medical doctors.
Yes.
But he does talk about like the swamp generally. And he even says that he thinks that there was an administrative coup against Trump. And even though he disagrees with most of Trump's political positions, as a president, any president, then he shouldn't have had the deep state perpetually undermining him and making false allegations. So that's very interesting because as far as I'm aware, he's the first Democrat who's come out, who's certainly running for president.
Yes.
And said that there basically was a coup against Trump. And I'm amazed that Trump's people haven't seized upon that and are playing that 1 minute on every single TV and radio station for like a month. I mean, that's a real big screw up, right? So I can't frankly explain that. I do think that like Galloway does, that Kennedy is an extremely strong candidate and could take a huge share of the independents.
Well, the one thing I'll say about that, Simon, is it's this Kennedy link to the dirty word. You're not allowed to talk about anti and jab, and that can be the only reason that the Trump camp is staying away from such a gift from that particular statement that you just made.
I think you're probably quite right about that, because Trump still hasn't broken away from the vax. And what was very, very interesting that I'll just quickly mention with you is, remember Peter Navarro? He was in the Trump administration for a while. Then he resigned because he wasn't able to overcome Fauci and Birx on the COVID task force.
Yes.
Now, he came out with a statement today, basically trying to provide cover on the vax for Trump, because it's a huge Achilles heel for Trump, right? And I saw that, and I made a comment on Twitter saying this is complete bullshit. And Trump, before COVID started, signed a executive order for the modernization of the flu vaccine, so that it would actually be a universal flu vaccine, just like they're now testing, right? So that it would give you mRNA-based immunity in theory against all 20 versions of the flu, so that they wouldn't have to guess 4 out of 20 every year and then scramble to make them between June and September, right? So what was that technology? It was mRNA in lipid nanoparticles, exactly like they're now testing the universal flu vaccine. COVID itself was a particular pathogen, you know, assuming that you're in the group of people who actually believe that it exists, right? And so if it is, and if they got the computer code for it, and they made up the vaccine in 2 days, according to the Moderna folks, then that was the existing DARPA and BARDA research projects that it was dropped into. Now, somebody very helpfully found that executive order, and it's interesting that Trump signed it on 9/19/19, okay, which is a palindrome that reads the same either way, the 9th of September 2019, okay? That was the last day of a palindrome week. And there isn't going to be another palindrome week until 2114. So the conspiracy theorists amongst us can now get off down that rabbit hole of not only did he sign it introducing mRNA and lipid nanoparticles, so he clearly knew that there was new technology. He didn't think that it was like the measles vaccine or the shingles vaccine, which is what Peter Navarro is trying to say to explain how supposedly Trump was tricked into using this untested technology. He signed the document 6 months before he even declared the emergency, and a year and 4 months before they rolled out the vaccines. So that's not a valid excuse for Trump.
No, it's not. Now, Simon, we're way over time again. There's a few things I want to bring up before we go, and I just want to thank our audience today. It's the largest live audience we've had, Simon, since we've been doing these shows. At any one time, people come in and they come out and they share and like. But thank you, everyone, for your comments today, likes and shares, and the sheer number. Even though we're only microscopic in the scheme of things, you are the people who are building this up and the great news. And thanks for the great comments today, and especially for Simon's great work. Simon, I'll get you to read the comments back later. You'll be quite pleased. by what people are saying. But I also want to point out that tomorrow on the show, James Rajewski will be here. Now, he's been interviewed all over America. Now, he's one of the world's best at reporting on the World Health Organization. So I'm delighted that James is going to appear live on the show. It'll be 10 a.m. Sydney, 5 p.m. California, and 8 p.m. If you're in Florida. And I wonder if I can get Simon to join in to ask a few questions of James as well. But we'll be talking specifically about the World Health Assembly. So that's pretty exciting as well. So we are certainly going places here, Simon. And I'm thrilled that there's a lot happening in the world and a lot of people wanting to take part. But something else I want to bring up before we go. Now, Prime Minister Modi of India has been in Australia. This is in a response to not being here for the Quad, and they met up overseas. He went to PNG on his way over. But as you said just a little while ago, it's what they bury at the bottom of an article. I just want to point something out here. Have a look at this. This is the headline from the story. Albanese welcomes Indian Prime Minister Modi to Sydney in a crowd of 21,000 people in Sydney, rah, rah, rah. But right down the very last paragraph, take a look at this. Earlier on Tuesday, he met with the prominent Australian business leaders, including Gina Rinehart, Australian Super Chief Executive Paul Schroeder, and Fortescue Metals Group Chairman Andrew Twiggy Forrest in Sydney to discuss economic partnerships with Indian companies. So 2 out of the 3 people mentioned there, Simon, are miners. Now, if we're talking about Albanese and The Voice, and Albanese and the great energy, the green energy taking place and net zero by 2040 or whatever it is, India is coming to Australia and doing deals with our miners. Their net zero doesn't kick in until when again?
2070.
So we are selling our coal, presumably our mineral exports from these great mining companies to India, and we have to switch ours off in here in Australia. Does it just seem like our politicians are confused?
I think, Jason, it's potentially much worse for the Australian public. I think what Modi's talking about is having those companies move lock, stock and barrel to India.
Wow.
So, because basically, if they're run out of business by the Greens and Labour, they don't want literally their share price to go to zero, right? They want to be like Hong Kong Bank when they moved from Hong Kong to London.
Yep.
So, supposedly, there's trillions of dollars of rare earth metals that they just need the technology to extract, but they also want to process it in India. They want to have the added value of not just mining but also processing in India. So I suspect, and obviously I wasn't present in those meetings, so I can't tell you for certain. I don't have some secret commercial knowledge. But if you're talking about plans that for India go out to 2060 for China and 2070 for India for net zero. He's not particularly worried, given his age, about net zero, though they are pursuing that for the G20, just as a sop to the Europeans and the Americans and the WEF. But what he's concerned about in 10 years' time is having the technical expertise and the experience. So he could literally take, let's say hypothetically, and I'm sure you could find the data, how many managers, engineers, administrators, and scientists, not individual miners and truck drivers, that they could hire no problem at all in India. But the technical whiz people, the ones with the master's degrees and the big brains, right? If they took all of those, let's say hypothetically, for the entire industry, it was 500,000 people. Hypothetically, right? Putting that into 1.5 billion in India, they wouldn't even notice it.
No.
Right? In the meantime, Albo-Origine, is talking about flying in 715,000 unskilled migrants to Australia. The Indians want to asset strip Australia and potentially take the best and the brightest so that they can have a mining industry, gut Australia, all the regular Joes, all the tradie type people, they're all unemployed, all the top people go, so your tax base collapses, and it's less people than Albo wants to fly in on an annual basis.
Gosh,
I mean,
it's repulsive.
From a strategy point of view, it's brilliant, isn't it?
From India, of course.
From an Indian point of view, right? Now, I'm not saying that's what's happened, but why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So I'm way over time today. Two quick stories I want to touch on. Iran and Indonesia to use national currencies in trade is a big story with an agreement.
That's much bigger. That's much bigger than that. So very quickly to run through that. So Raisi, the president of Iran, has gone to Indonesia, bearing in mind that Indonesia was the head of the G20 last year. They're in the G20. And they are the largest Islamic country, and they're a major player in the Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC. Okay? And so he has gone there, and they currently, I don't know, have $50-100 million worth of international trade between them. It's a long way apart and not particularly big trading partners. They've hatched a number of schemes, which they've signed off on today, to raise that to $20 billion. Wow. Now, $20 billion is the equivalent of Iran's entire oil industry. So for Iran, that's two ways. So it's like 10 billion one way, 10 billion the other way. But it's still a huge number, huge number. But also, Iran is subject to like a zillion sanctions from the Americans and the Europeans.
Of course.
Indonesia is generally regarded as being very pro-West. So for them to suddenly start signing trade deals with the Iranians and to say that they're going to trade in non-dollars is like yet another huge FU to the Americans. It's like loss number 4.
Yes.
So these like losses are just like going like bang, 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 bang. Like it's at like the most incredible rate. And so, we see that announcement. Then we're waiting for BRICS. Then we're waiting for Putin's big speech at the BRI forum. And so this is the year. This is the year when all the changes are being announced. And that really came, we knew a couple of days ago that he did a whole load of cultural things, saw some dancers, lit some candles, all that kind of stuff yesterday. But today was like the big kahuna. He really, closed the deals, and a lot of deals. And he wasn't on his own. He had a huge, big delegation of senior ministers with him. So that's a huge success for Raisi. Now, it's hard to see how they use the Iranian rial, though. I suspect that they'll end up using the either the new BRICS currency or the Chinese yuan.
Yeah, so that contradicts the headline there that says to use national currencies in trade. So we'll watch this space. Now, Simon, if you've got Indonesia doing deals with Iran and you've got Modi flying into PNG, Papua New Guinea, and then you've got Blinken from the United States Secretary of State also signing up there to somehow shore up military security in the region, doesn't the Iranian-Indonesia deal eclipse it, even if one's business and one's military? It just seems like it's just such a too little too late and much ado about nothing.
No, I mean, the Papua New Guinea deal is specifically military, and it involves Navy, Air Force, and Army. Okay, it's a 15-year deal. The Prime Minister was talking about it today, and he's basically indicated it's going to be massive bases, airfields, or just like basically turning it into like the Philippines was in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
It's a bit of a tragedy for Papua New Guinea, to be honest. But it's a complete offset to the Chinese in Solomon Islands. And if you look on the map, the South Pacific, you'll see the Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, they literally like face off against each other. Okay. Now, the Americans are also doing what they call these COFA, which is this Compact on Free Association. And they've signed that with Palau and it's either the Federation of Micronesia or the Marshall Islands. Like, two of them are done and one of them's like almost done. Those were previous 15-year deals, which the PNG deal has been modeled on. Those 15-year deals are two of which are running out this year and one of which was running out next year. They're all being rolled over for an additional 15 years. So that is an enormous relief to the Americans that they've got now, even though the Solomon Islands is literally and figuratively a pain in the butt, that they've now straddled it. And so it would be much easier for them to interdict the Chinese Navy should they come trying to pour through towards Australia.
Gotcha.
Which I frankly don't envisage as being very likely, but the Americans wanted to be in control of those areas rather than the Chinese, because you remember that last year the Chinese tried very, very hard to get a block deal signed off at the Pacific Islander Forum, but it was Micronesia, Palau, Vanuatu. They basically blocked that. They blocked a consensus deal with the whole PIF, and then Wang flew around like Tonga and Samoa and the Solomon Islands, and he was only able to sign a couple of deals. Like he did one non-military in Fiji. I think he did something in Tonga, and he did something in the big one in the Solomon Islands. So it looked like when he got moved from the position of foreign minister that he had actually been demoted. But in fact, he hadn't. He was actually promoted onto the Politburo. But that gave the opportunity for Qin Gang, the Chinese ambassador to America, to be promoted from being an ambassador to being the foreign minister. And he is clearly doing a really bang-up job as far as the Chinese are concerned as their foreign minister. So that shuffle has worked out very, very well. That's the guy who the diplomatic corps nicknamed the Wolf Warrior, because he would stand up so strongly against the Americans while he was in Washington, D.C., and the entire international diplomatic corps really respected him for that. And that's why they called him the Wolf Warrior, named after the Rambo type character in the Chinese movies.
Gotcha.
The character in those movies, sometimes he's working with the government, and a lot of the time he's doing stuff, saving people, despite the bureaucracy of the Chinese government. So he's very much a Rambo-esque character. He's called the Wolf Warrior, and that's the nickname they've given Qin Gang.
Now, the last story I want to bring up, Simon, is about the debt ceiling. We learned from the Daily Mail that another day ends with no debt limit deal. The White House suggests Biden won't use the 14th Amendment, and progressive Democrats say there will be anger in the streets if demands. I'll just repeat
so it's real interesting, because for both sides, this is potentially a really good 2024 campaign issue. Okay? And at the moment, the Republicans are polling very strongly that because they've passed the bill to remove this issue, and it's just the Democrat-controlled Senate that need to accept it, and then Biden will need to sign it, that the solution is already there. Okay? And so people know that, and they're like, well, we can't keep on spending like a drunken sailor. Okay? So what's going to happen is, even though they don't need to, it looks like the Treasury is going to lay off a load of federal employees, and they're also potentially going to stop like food stamps. Now, if they stop food stamps, I've seen food stamps stopped for like a day in the past. Okay, now it's not just Black African Americans who receive food stamps. Obviously, people of all races do. But a lot of them do, and they do have a propensity, as we saw with the BLM riots, to kick off when they're aggrieved about something, right? And so I think that given that the defunding the police and Antifa and the BLM have really fallen out of public favor, right? If the Treasury, even without economic justification, were to say, sorry, we're going to stop food stamps, say, for a month, right? There would be nationwide riots. The supermarkets would be ransacked. The businesses would be burnt to the ground. You'd have the George Floyd riots all over again. And that might be effective, but frankly, it doesn't matter whether it is or not. It just matters if there are some idiots in the Democratic Party that think that in order to secure re-election for Joe Biden, it's worth putting the nation through that shit again.
I don't know how that even gives them even a chance. I would have thought that if there's a debt ceiling that gets eclipsed and they default one way or another, that would be the end of Biden at that point. This would be historic.
It's a question of who takes the blame. So if they figure that they can blame the Republicans, and that happens because of the Republicans, as all of the media that backs the Democrats, like 90%, would message that, right? Don't forget, they got people to buy the COVID, the fucking 2 meter distancing and wear 2 masks and don't send your kids to school, right? They've proved that if there's an even slightly plausible story, if the entire media complex will push it, will push, not just buys it, but will push it, right? Then they can get away with anything. Okay. So that's the important thing to remember, is that, you can't project your logic and rationality onto them. If that were the case, we'd have had world peace, you and I, 20 years ago.
Very true. Good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Now, Simon, we've almost hit the 90-minute mark, which would make this I suppose it's the War and Peace version of our show so far. But as those that have been tuning in and out today, it's our highest ever live audience at any one time. I'm really thrilled that people are sharing and are joining in for the
you're
wrap
saying
up
that
of the global news.
We need to apologise to more people today?
Yeah, well, I think that might be the case. Well said, Simon. But look, I'm really thrilled that we're able to cover a lot of ground here, and including Australian news as well. And we're always trying to cover the news here that you won't get on the mainstream. Whilst we will overlap in some areas, of course, what we're trying to do is show you that there is so much news out there that the mainstream is not covering. And if we continue to do this work, more and more people will start talking, suggesting, and also getting involved with telling these stories as they are and revealing them as Simon has. It was on Simon's suggestion that we've asked James Rajewski to join us tomorrow to talk about the World Health Assembly and the World Health Organization, and we'll even attempt to put that out live on YouTube, who will no doubt have their 25 different officers looking at my show to cancel me as quickly as possible.
That's quite risky doing that.
Yeah, exactly. But look, we'll see how we go. But I'm really thrilled that James has managed to get the time, and we've lined it up. So 10 a.m. Australian time, Eastern Australian time, 5 p.m. California, 8 p.m. over there
picture, if you wouldn't mind, of the World War III movie.
Yeah, let's put that up there now for you. So this is entertaining homework.
What I'll try and do, and I appreciate that I can refer to, founding documents of the Chinese Communist Party and stuff like that. And, in reality, whilst it would be nice if people would skim through that kind of stuff, I have low expectations. So what I'll try and do, particularly where there are analogies, is recommend these kinds of things that are either free or cheap and are easily accessible, and you can cut in and out, and maybe even show the wife or the teenage children, because part of it is a classic war movie, shooting and tanks and paratroopers and stuff. Yep. But the really interesting stuff in today's context is not only the background, like why this whole situation comes apart, which is very much like the economic blockade in Japan that started World War II, and what we're doing to Russia now, and what we have been doing to
Yep.
Iran, that because they've now built their own blocks so large, they're breaking out of. And this is the difference, because with Japan, remember, they formed the what was it, the Greater Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. Okay, so they said, right, Burma, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, all the South Pacific, you're now all going to be our block. But they didn't do like the Chinese, where they did it through business deals. They did it through force of arms, much like the British East India Company, right? And so you've got that comparison, which is interesting to see. But particularly interesting is the Politburo versus the American National Security Council negotiations.
Yep.
Now, I appreciate it's just a movie. I've used the phrase before that sometimes life imitates art, but that key concept there is trust, and whether in great power competition you can ever trust your counterpart enough that you can do a peace deal or a business deal, as opposed to fighting it till there's only one man left standing.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Look, that will be the end of the show for today. James Rajewski will be up tomorrow from 10 a.m. Thank you, Simon, yet again. It's been a brilliant show today. As they are getting better and better, we're trying to give you as much information and discussion. Thank you for your comments, your likes and your shares. And we'll see you all again tomorrow, 10 a.m. Sydney time. Thank you for watching.